Midwestern springs have a way of softening things, light through the leaves, the way people greet you like nothing ever happened. I stood at the edge of my father's backyard in Fort Wayne, pretending to breathe easy. 2 years had passed since I last stepped on this grass, and I'd told myself I was coming back stronger. I had practiced my smile in the car mirror, checked my tone to make sure I didn't sound like I had anything to prove, because if you walk in looking whole, they're less likely to pick at your cracks. Lucian, my father, had insisted on an outdoor lunch to celebrate his 68th. Nothing too formal, he said, just family and a few friends. His idea of not too formal included white tablecloths, floral arrangements with place cards, and a catered lunch spread. Indira, my sister, was in her usual tailored linen, effortlessly at home. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek like I was a visiting cousin. I pretended not to notice. The table was set for 15, mostly extended family, a couple of his friends from the golf club, and his longtime accountant. I recognized nearly every face, people who'd watched me grow up but never really knew me. I poured myself a glass of Chardonnay and took the seat furthest from Lucian's. I had brought a gift, a first-edition book he'd once said he loved as a teen, framed with a handwritten note from the original author. I'd spent months sourcing it. I placed it gently on the gift table, next to bottles of whiskey and gift cards that screamed convenience. Lunch was loud in the way that makes quiet people feel like they're drowning. Someone cracked a joke about Lucian's cholesterol, another about my long absence. I smiled politely, answering only what was asked. My father, in his ironed golf shirt and thick watch, leaned back and laughed like nothing had ever fallen apart. When dessert came out, 3-tiered chocolate torte, his favorite, Lucian raised his glass and tapped it lightly with his knife. "Let's make it quick," he began. "I'm not big on speeches." I felt my stomach tighten. I knew that tone. He looked around the table with ease, his smile deliberate. 68, not a bad number, and I'm grateful to spend it with the people who've truly stood by me. He let that one hang. No one moved. To being surrounded by loyalty, by clarity, by the kind of peace that comes when you remove the noise. He turned his head, looked directly at me. "The best gift I could get this year?" His grin sharpened. "If Celine finally left my life." No one gasped. One guest laughed, awkward, the kind of laugh that wants to disappear. Indira stared at her plate. My glass was half full. I didn't look away. I blinked once, smiled gently, lifted my glass. "To peace," I whispered. No one clinked glasses with me. I excused myself a few minutes later, claiming I needed to make a call. Instead, I walked slowly toward the guest bathroom, past walls lined with family photos, most of which I was not in. The bathroom smelled of lavender hand soap and cologne. I turned the faucet on, letting cold water run over my hands until my fingers numbed. I stared at my reflection, the same one I used to see in my mother's eyes. I'd spent years making myself smaller, more agreeable, more silent. The useful one. Never the celebrated, never the chosen. They didn't shout me down. They erased me politely. Back at the table, someone had moved into my chair. My gift sat unopened, untouched. I slipped out the side gate without saying goodbye. The sky had dulled, clouds stretching wide like fabric left too long on the line. I reached my car, buckled in, and stared ahead until the ignition felt real beneath my hand. My phone buzzed as I pulled onto the main road. A notification. Bank alert. Your joint access to account ending in €499 has been removed. No signature, no request. Just gone. I didn't panic. I didn't call. I just drove. The notification on my screen didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a warning. I pulled into my driveway, the car still humming beneath me, and reread the message just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting anything. My name had been removed from the trust account my father opened when I was 19. The one he said was, "Just in case anything ever happened." The same one I never touched, never questioned, because that's what trust used to mean in our family. It had happened 48 hours before his birthday party. He didn't just erase me at that table. He'd erased me days before and delivered the announcement with cake and Chardonnay. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and went straight to my desk drawer, the one where I still kept old statements, not because I didn't believe in digital, but because there are some things you want to feel paper proof of. Last quarter, my name was still listed next to his. Black ink, clear type. I ran my finger down the column like it could pull back time. I called the bank that evening. After the usual maze of automated voices and piano hold music, a young woman finally answered. Hi, I'm calling to confirm access to the trust account ending in 5127. My name is Celine Westphal. A pause. Keys clicking. Another pause. I'm sorry, Ms. Westphal. You're not listed on this account. I sat up straighter. That can't be right. I have statements from just a few months ago. She lowered her voice slightly, probably reading some note on her screen. Only Mr. Lucian Crow and Ms. Indira Vale are currently listed. Indira. I didn't yell. I didn't even sigh. I just thanked her and hung up. The next morning, I took a train downtown. Not the usual branch. I needed answers, not apologies. The banker at the desk was efficient and polite, which only made me more furious inside. He printed out the most recent ownership list. My name was gone. As I stood near the exit, staring at the paper in my hand, someone tapped me lightly on the arm. Celine? Celine Westphal? I turned. A woman with short silver hair and warm eyes smiled at me, Astria Finch, my mother's friend from the community board years ago. I hadn't seen her in ages. Wow, she said. You look so much like Evelyn now. My mother, always Evelyn, never Mom in these passing conversations. I nodded. What brings you here? She asked. Trust account? Or the lack of one now? Her smile dimmed. Oh, she said. Funny. I thought your father moved everything into your sister's portfolio last month. At least, that's what he told me when I bumped into him at the civic fundraiser. My face didn't move. My body stayed still. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't deletion. It was a transfer, a redirection, behind my back. On the ride home, I played my father's words in my mind like an old voicemail. You only plan inheritance when you've decided who deserves what. Deserve. That word had a taste now, metallic, heavy, dangerous. At home, I pulled out a fresh page in my journal and wrote, deserve. That's a heavy word for a daughter to carry. I made tea I didn't drink, sat in my robe, went over every form I'd ever signed over the last decade. All the, just sign here, sweetheart, moments. The signature lines handed to me with confident smiles. The kind of moments women are trained not to question, because questioning looks like mistrust, and mistrust makes you the problem. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. That quote from Eleanor Roosevelt popped into my head like a challenge. Had I consented to being lesser? To being erased? By late evening, I had filled a folder with documents and printouts. One more drawer left, an older storage bin I rarely touched. It held high school diplomas, tax returns, and folders labeled in my mother's handwriting. Near the back, a manila envelope caught my eye. Family Trust. Final. It wasn't sealed, but it wasn't familiar either. I pulled it open and flipped through the contents. My name appeared on the last page, right next to a signature that looked almost like mine, almost, but I didn't sign it. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at it and whispered, if he could fake this, what else has he rewritten? My name was there, staring back at me from the bottom of the document. It curled in familiar loops, the S pressed hard, the last L trailing off like I always did when rushing to sign something in passing. But I hadn't signed this page. I knew that like I knew my own breath. The document was thick, stapled together with a precision that tried to scream legitimacy. No notary stamp, no witness signature. Just my name in ink that wasn't mine. I set it down on the table next to my laptop and sat on the floor, surrounded by a growing storm of paper. Statements, notes, folders I hadn't opened in years. I had opened a box, and now everything was spilling, both literally and inside me. I stared at the forged signature like it was a mirror. A smart man doesn't steal, my father once told a client at a dinner I foolishly attended years ago. He makes you believe you handed it over. The table had laughed. I hadn't. And now I was beginning to understand just how deeply that statement had applied to me. Desperate to ground myself in something real, I opened the old USB drive tucked in a mason jar on the second shelf of my bookcase, a place I stored things not because they mattered, but because I wasn't ready to throw them out. The drive blinked, then loaded, folder after folder with vague labels, until one caught my eye. Family Events 2011. I clicked. The video started mid-sentence. A banquet hall. My father standing beneath a spotlight, toasting his colleagues at the Crow Foundation's annual dinner. Indira beside him, dressed in navy, poised. "My only daughter," he beamed as the MC handed her a bouquet. The room applauded. Off camera, a woman's voice, mine, called out something about the keynote speech. My father turned, laughed, and said, "Sweetheart, can you grab coffee for the team and back?" The screen dimmed as my chest tightened. It wasn't just the line. It was how easily it rolled off his tongue, how naturally I was background noise in a celebration of someone else's role. He had practiced my erasure long before he had the courage to legalize it. I closed the video, opened the next file. Not a video, just a scan. The paper was slightly yellowed, the handwriting instantly familiar, my mother's script. The date read 5 years before her stroke. If you're reading this, it means you've finally seen it. The shrinking of your space, the quiet shifting of doors you thought were yours. I didn't know how to tell you while I was still in it. I hoped you'd never have to notice. My breath caught. Not from grief, I had long accepted that, but from the realization that I had never been alone. Someone had seen it. She had just been trying to survive it herself. I set the scan down, gently like it could shatter. My knees ached from sitting too long, but I didn't move. I opened my journal instead, flipped to a blank page, and wrote, "It's not the money. It's not even the signature. It's that they've been preparing to write me out of the story since before I knew there was a story being told." I paused, then added beneath it, "Gaslighting doesn't make you question reality. It makes you question your worth." Dr. Tama Bryant. They didn't just erase my name from accounts. They'd been rehearsing it for years, in conversations, in roles, in how often I was asked to step aside so Indira could shine. My mother knew. She left this breadcrumb not as a message of despair, but as a marker, a way to say, "You're not crazy." I needed answers now, not more paper. I reached for my phone and called the number I had saved for decades, Robert Klein, our family's accountant. The call rang longer than usual before it was redirected. A woman answered, cool and clear. "Vale Financial Services, this is Brianna." I blinked. "I'm trying to reach Robert Klein." Pause. "Mr. Klein has transitioned his client accounts. Can I ask who's calling?" "This is Celine Vestfall. I've worked with Robert for years. He's my family's accountant." Another pause, tighter this time. "All of Mr. Crow's assets and corresponding account oversight have been reassigned under Ms. Indira Vale." The air around me changed. Heavy, colder somehow. Of course, he hadn't just erased me. He'd handed her the pen. If Indira was now the one holding the keys, then my father hadn't just removed me from the story. He'd rewritten the entire damn chapter. I sat in my car, engine off, parked outside the bank in downtown Chicago with the paper trail spread across my passenger seat. The warmth from the sun through the windshield was the only thing grounding me, because inside I was sliding. I scrolled through my emails, searching by keyword. Klein. Trust. Authorization. A thread popped up, dated nearly 3 months earlier. A response from Robert Klein himself. "As per your father's instruction, all future documentation will be handled through Indira." There it was. No discussion, no courtesy call, just a handoff. A blind pass down the family chain of command. My thumb hovered over the phone. I wanted to scream. Instead, I screenshot the email, uploaded it to a cloud folder I'd named Proof. I didn't even know what I was building yet, but I knew I'd need it. On the train ride home, I watched the buildings slide by, each glass reflection a different version of myself, one angry, one numb, one just tired. And somewhere in that silent carousel of memory, it clicked. That brunch. A month ago, Fort Wayne. My father's house. A rare moment of domestic peace that I had allowed myself to believe was sincere. I'd wandered into the kitchen to refill my coffee and paused when I heard their voices, his and Indira's. Just get her to sign, Lucian said, tone clipped. Don't make it a war. Indira replied without pause. You think she won't notice? I hadn't stepped in. I hadn't even processed it at the time. I chalked it up to estate management talk, to paranoia that didn't need feeding. But now I could hear the intention clear as thunder. That wasn't estate talk. That was a setup. They weren't negotiating. They were moving pieces. And I'd been the pawn who kept smiling across the board. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I could almost hear Maya Angelou whispering it directly into my ear. By the time I got home, my jaw hurt from how hard I'd been clenching. I tossed my purse onto the counter, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight to the bedroom closet. Somewhere in there, bottom drawer, third box, I had stashed the will, the one my mother had given me before her stroke. Her voice still echoed in my memory. Keep this where no one will look, just in case. The box was there. The envelope was there. The contents were not. Just a sliver of torn edge and the faint outline of where paper had been pressed too long. I dialed Bryn Adler, the lawyer who notarized the original. She picked up after 2 rings. Bryn, it's Celine. I need to confirm something. Did you still have a copy of the will my mother left with you? A pause, then a breath. Celine, that file, it's either sealed or destroyed. Your father exercised his legal rights as executor. I wasn't at liberty to notify you. Her voice was apologetic, but distant, like she was trying to be soft without sounding guilty. I didn't argue, didn't yell. I just ended the call and sat on the edge of my bed, hands numb, eyes locked on the floor like it could explain something. It wasn't just strategy. It wasn't even about assets anymore. It was removal. A slow, clinical erasure of identity. And I had been asleep to it. That changed now. I pulled out a yellow legal pad from the kitchen drawer, drew 3 columns. Who touched the will? Who handles the trust? Who benefits if I'm gone? I filled in the blanks one by one. I didn't speculate. I listed facts. I remembered what my mother's letter had said. They will test the limits of your silence. Well, I had been silent long enough. I opened a browser, researched law firms specializing in estate fraud, emailed 3, called 1. By evening, I had a scheduled consultation with a small but focused firm in Chicago. Their intake coordinator, a woman named Jasmine, took my information with the kind of calm efficiency that made me feel seen. This isn't our first case like this, she said, but it'll be our last with your name on it. I didn't smile, just said thank you. Later that night, I crawled into bed, still dressed, body sore from the emotional tension I had dragged through the day. I grabbed my phone for no reason. Maybe a distraction. Maybe habit. A text blinked at the top of my screen. Unknown number. Don't sign anything else. They're not done. My heart stopped for half a second. Then I read it again. And again. There was no name. No signature. But I knew that voice. Ophalie Gray, my mother's sister. The one who vanished from our family a decade ago without explanation. And if she was breaking the silence now, then the danger wasn't just emotional, it was legal. I hadn't heard my Aunt Ophalie's voice since I was 24, not since she stormed out of our family Thanksgiving dinner and left her pecan pie cooling on the porch steps. But I knew her tone, low, sharp, never dramatic. When I called her back that night, she picked up before the first full ring. Don't trust anything that comes through Indira, she said before I could speak. Your father's already made her executor. You've been set up. Why now? I asked. She hesitated. Because this is the same way they erased your mother. Click. She ended the call. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in my kitchen, the ceiling fan humming overhead like a metronome to my rising fury. The forged document lay on the counter. Every line I hadn't signed, every signature that mimicked my hand. I didn't cry. I made an appointment. Tomas Reyes wasn't flashy. His office was tucked between a dry cleaner and an old insurance agency in a part of the city no one renovated. I liked that. It smelled like cedar and something clinical. He wore a gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, no tie. He didn't ask about my family at first, just flipped through my papers, lips pursed. When he reached the trust documents, he paused. These weren't filed through any clerk's office. My stomach tensed. Meaning? He slid the pages toward me, pointing at the margins. This looks constructed. Internal dates don't match. No court filing stamp. It's a draft parading as final. I leaned back. What happens if I go public? He smiled, almost kindly. First, we go private and smart. We spent the next hour mapping legal options. Cease and desist letters, preservation of asset requests. I left his office with a printed plan and something I hadn't carried in months, momentum. That evening, after dinner, I logged into Facebook, mostly to distract myself. I hadn't posted anything in weeks. My notifications were quiet, but then I saw it. A tag. Indira had shared a photo of our father holding a glass of whiskey, smiling beside her. The caption read, "Proud to carry the legacy forward now that Celine has stepped away." My fingers froze on the keyboard. Stepped away. I hadn't taken one voluntary step in this whole mess. I screenshotted it, sent it to Tomas, then stared at the glowing screen, wondering how much more she planned to spin. A few minutes later, a message request popped up. Valora Quinn. I hadn't seen her name in years, since we shared late-night ramen in college, argued over constitutional law, and studied under the same feminist legal ethics professor. Her message was short. Saw Indira's post. It's being passed around legal circles. FYI, you're not the first she's pushed out. I typed fast. I didn't step away. I was erased. She replied instantly. Let me help. No paperwork. Off the record. I'll be your shadow. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed. Let's burn the whole thing down. Quietly. Back at home, I pulled out the draft envelope my father had tried to slip past me. I lit a match, watched the edges curl inward. The paper blackened, then flaked into a silence I could finally live with. In my journal, I wrote, no more asking why, no more waiting for recognition. I draw my own boundary, and I sign it with fire. Then I opened Tomas's letter template. We edited it together over a Zoom call. At midnight, I printed it out, folded it with precision. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow. I'd underlined that quote from Dr. Phil years ago. Now it felt like gospel. I sealed the envelope. Then the doorbell rang. Through the peephole stood Indira. Her expression calm. Her mouth curled upward. Not quite a smile. She held a bakery box in both hands like peace offering wrapped in frosting. But I knew better. She hadn't come to make peace. She'd come to finish what our father started. When I opened the door, I didn't open it all the way. I kept my body angled like a wedge between the threshold and the space behind me. She stood there, perfect posture, manicured fingers wrapped delicately around a white bakery box, her smile soft and rehearsed. You looked thin in your last photo, Indira said, voice coated in concern so practiced it rang hollow. Thought I'd bring something sweet. That's not why you came, I replied, not moving an inch. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes, they didn't blink. Not once. She stood there like she knew she had the upper hand and didn't need to prove it anymore. I stepped aside, just enough for her to enter, and watched as she walked into my apartment like it was hers. She headed to the kitchen, placed the box on the counter, then opened a cabinet without asking, as if she still had the right to. I hope your coffee machine still works, she said casually. Dad always liked it with oat milk, remember? I stayed standing while she poured water into the kettle. The audacity of her ease felt like sandpaper on skin. I have a question, I said, arms crossed. Why was I getting replies from my number when I hadn't sent them? She didn't flinch, just reached for the tea bags. You left your iPad unlocked at Dad's last Christmas, she said, matter of fact. I only ever typed what you would have said, trying to keep things smooth. You impersonated me. I was helping, she said, her tone not shifting. You were busy, distant, unreliable. I took a step forward. That's federal wire fraud, just so we're clear. She finally turned to look at me, brows raised slightly. Only if you can prove it. There it was, the threat behind the frosting, the blade tucked under polite conversation. That evening, after she left without so much as a sip of her own tea, I shut the blinds and opened my laptop. I contacted Mayless Drake, an old friend of a friend, now an IT forensic specialist in Evanston. We'd crossed paths during a library legal aid event years ago. I sent an encrypted message. She replied within 20 minutes. I'll need IP logs from your router, device sync history, and timestamps, she wrote. Send it all. I'll see what's buried. I stayed up until 2 a.m., combing through archives, pulling metadata from messages I never wrote but somehow had my name attached. When I sent everything, I signed the email simply, "It's time." The next afternoon, Mayless called. You've been shadowed for a while, she said. I cross-checked device access from the last 6 months. There's a consistent remote login from an IP out of Fort Wayne, matching your dad's property. I didn't respond at first, just pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Celine, she said gently. Everything that looked off? It was. That evening, I drafted a formal letter with Tomas's help. It demanded all communications regarding the estate be documented, archived, and routed through legal channels. No more phone calls, no more backdoor edits. The reply from Indira came the next morning. 2 lines. Fine, but you'll be seen as the one who started this war. I didn't even hesitate before writing back. No, I'm just the one who stopped pretending it was peace. Later that night, I sat on my couch with a glass of red wine, my journal open beside me. The city outside buzzed with its usual chaos, but inside, I felt something finally settle. I didn't lose my family, I wrote. I left their illusion. And beneath that, one more truth I didn't have to cite. People don't abandon the ones they love. They abandon the ones they can no longer use. The next morning, I opened my front door to get the paper and found a plain white envelope slid just under the mat. No return address. Inside was a printed invoice. My name attached to a $4,300 home repair in Fort Wayne. A property I hadn't stepped foot in for over a year. If they were forging debts now, they weren't just trying to erase me. They were trying to bankrupt me into silence. I sat at my kitchen table with the invoice spread out before me like a final insult. $4,300 for a roof repair in Fort Wayne, on a house I hadn't lived in for over a year. I didn't even need to look at the contractor's name twice. I recognized it immediately. Gary Nellis. A long-time drinking buddy of my father's who once fixed a broken garage door and spent more time flirting with our neighbor than hammering nails. The invoice was dated 2 weeks ago. The charges were detailed. Shingles, labor, transport. It was all there, except one thing. My approval, my signature. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated. I stood up, moved to the kitchen sink, and let the water run cold as I stared out the window at nothing in particular. This wasn't just about money. It was about framing me, making it look like I was involved, liable, quieting me with a debt they thought I'd swallow because it's family. I dried my hands, walked back to the table, and reached for my phone. Just as I unlocked it, a new email pinged in. Subject line, troubling behavior from Celine, forwarded from my aunt. The sender, Indira. I opened it, pulse already pounding. She had sent it to every extended family member, 2 of Dad's law school friends, and someone listed only as trustee law. The contents read like a smear campaign straight out of a scandal manual. Mentally unstable, disrespectful to our aging father, siphoning funds. She even claimed I'd been seen rummaging through family documents in erratic ways. The language was polished, lawyer-adjacent, and it was laced with a sweetness so poisonous I almost gagged. I scrolled to the bottom, where she signed off with, "This has been hard for all of us. I only hope Celine finds peace soon." My jaw tightened so hard I had to unclench it just to breathe. I stared at the screen, reread the email twice, then tapped Indira's contact. She picked up like she'd been expecting the call. "Well, that was quick," she said, overly chipper. Did you really send that? I asked calmly. Sel, she sighed, dragging my name like a burden. You're taking everything so personally. It's just family sorting things out. You know how it is. People get emotional. You accused me of stealing. I didn't say stealing. I said siphoning. It's different. And you know how people misread things. Emotions were high. Don't do that, I said, my voice sharp now. Don't pretend your calculated slander was a misunderstanding. Her tone shifted, softer, tearful. Do you think this is easy for me? She said. You made Dad feel unsafe in his own home. He cries after you leave. He's old, Celine. He's fragile. And you don't get to weaponize tears and then rewrite history, I snapped. You don't get to cry and lie. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing through the line. I used to back down when you cried, I added. Now, I just write down the timestamp. Click. I ended the call. I opened a fresh document on my computer titled, They Won't Silence Me. I uploaded the invoice, the email, the call log, everything. Then I forwarded the whole file to Tomas. Minutes later, I got his reply. Now we have motive, pattern, and timeline. It's no longer a case, it's a strategy. I called Melis next. I need you to dig into contractor licensing, repair records, anything on Gary Nellis. She didn't ask questions, just said, give me 48 hours. It was nearing midnight by the time I closed my laptop. I poured a glass of water, pulled the blinds, and stood at the window. Chicago was still awake, honking and humming. But I felt silent in the best way, focused. Then another notification came in. Your access to joint account ending in 0421 has been removed. Second account. No notice, no reason, no consent. If they were pulling levers faster than I could track, I had only one choice left. To pull the one they didn't think I'd touch. I forwarded the bank alert to Tomas before sunrise. The subject line was simple. They're moving faster. He didn't reply right away. He didn't need to. We both knew this had shifted from mismanagement to a full-on maneuver, one meant to overwhelm me with noise and paper until I broke. At 10 a.m., I walked into the Legal Mediation Center in Fort Wayne. Neutral territory, neutral decor, beige walls, glass partitions, fresh carpet that smelled like cold detergent. A woman at the front desk smiled mechanically as she led me to conference room C. Indira and my father were already late. I wasn't surprised. Power thrives on making others wait. Tomas sat beside me, calm and collected in a navy sweater and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like the kind of man who ran marathons silently. He slid a file across to me. I skimmed. The copy of the account closure, a printed version of Indira's smear email, the invoice. It was all lined up like dominoes. When Lucian and Indira finally entered, they did so with the theater of two people confident they were winning. Lucian wore his I'm still in control gray sport coat. Indira smiled like a keynote speaker. I nodded at neither of them. Lucian opened with a chuckle. Let's not get lawyers involved in family business, Celine. I didn't flinch. I leaned forward, pressed a button on the small black recorder I'd placed between us. His voice came through, crackly but clear. Just get her to sign. Don't make it a war. Indira's response followed. You think she won't notice? The room went silent. Lucian's jaw tightened. Indira paled, her eyes darting to the door like she could escape the words she once said. Thomas didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Lucian cleared his throat. That was taken out of context. I looked at him. Funny, it sounded like a plan. Without another word, Lucian pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. A document sat on top, labeled Property Access Transfer. I flipped to the back. It was a disguised permanent reassignment of deed and insurance beneficiaries. A fraud with a ribbon on top. It's just so we can manage upkeep more easily, Lucian offered. I didn't react. I folded the paper slowly and tucked it into my folder. I won't be signing this, I said, but I'll be filing it. Lucian's face flushed red. You always had to make things difficult. I stood, locking eyes with him. No, I said, voice steady. I just stopped making them convenient. Tomas finally spoke, his voice soft but razor-sharp. You've turned your daughter into a legal liability. There's a documented paper trail of coercion here. If this were a company, we'd call it structural abuse. Indira started to open her mouth. Don't, I said sharply, turning toward her. You've already said enough, through every back door and blind side. Lucian slammed the table. You think you'll win something out of this? I already did, I replied. I won clarity. The mediator, who'd been silent the entire time, finally cleared her throat. I believe we should recess. I gathered my folder, thanked her, and walked out without another glance at either of them. The hallway outside was quiet. I walked slowly, deliberately, as if leaving that room could somehow mark the end of a decade of subtle betrayals. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. As the doors slid closed, my phone buzzed. A Dropbox link, anonymous sender, family recordings. Listen before signing anything again. I tapped the screen. The first voice that played wasn't Lucian's, and it wasn't Indira's. It was my mother's. The audio loaded instantly. No warning tone, no menu, just her voice. If you take her name off that trust, you take it off with a knife, and one day she'll bleed it back out. My mother. Clear, steady, unapologetic. I sat frozen on the couch, earbuds tight, holding the phone like it might bite me. The quality wasn't great. There was static in the background, like a small fan running, but every word landed like a stone. Then came his reply. She doesn't have the backbone. That girl still asks permission to be loved. Lucian. Confident. Cold. I pressed pause. The silence in my apartment felt foreign, as if even the furniture was listening. I hit play again, let the words roll over me like salt on an open wound. Not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. He'd said versions of that for years. To my face, behind closed doors, in boardrooms where I was too emotional or too soft for real leadership. He said those things not as critique, but as prophecy. And now I had the recording. The next file auto-played. It was a phone call. Yeah. Lucian's voice again. Put the invoice under Celine's name. That way it looks legal. She won't even notice. It was Gary Nellis he was speaking to, his old contractor buddy, the one who sent me the $4,300 invoice I never authorized. I sat back in my chair, heart racing but breath even. This wasn't paranoia. This was proof. I pulled the physical invoice from my folder, laid it beside my phone. Same name, same date, same setup. The third file was a voicemail, a woman's voice, older but crisp. This is Zinnia Hunt. I used to manage compliance for the branch Lucian banked at. I knew they were removing Celine without consent. I couldn't stop it, but I'm documenting it all. For the record. I closed my eyes. I hadn't even realized I was shaking. 3 files. 3 voices, 3 witnesses to the thing they kept telling me I'd imagined. I opened my email and forwarded all 3 to Tomas, adding only one line. Time-stamped, legal, and moral. His reply came back in minutes. This isn't just leverage. This is premeditated financial coercion. He was right. But what he didn't say was what it felt like. To finally hold the thing I'd never been given. Not love. Not apology, just truth. That afternoon, I took a drive out to my mother's grave. I hadn't visited in over a year, not because I didn't care, but because part of me was still mad. At her silence, at her absence, at how much she'd known and never said. But now I realized. She had said it, just not out loud. The sky was overcast, the air humid. I stood there for a long time before speaking. You weren't silent, I whispered. They just buried your warnings deeper than your body. I unclasped the locket around my neck, the one she gave me when I got into law school, slid it into the soil near the base of the stone. You said I'd bleed it back out, I said. I did, and now they'll feel it. I drove home in silence, hands firm on the wheel, heart unexpectedly calm. That night, while folding laundry, another email came in. No sender name. Subject line. You're not the only one they tried this on. I opened it. Inside was a scanned letter. Different name. Different handwriting. but the same forgery, same style of signature manipulation, same format as the trust paperwork I never signed. A woman named Elena from Colorado. She had been listed as a silent partner in one of Lucian's old ventures, cut out without warning. Letter dated 2016. My skin prickled. If I was just one chapter of their history, then I wasn't the first, and I sure as hell wouldn't be the last. The email from Elena still glowed on my screen, unopened for hours. I had read it 3 times already, memorized the way her signature curled, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. Same manipulation, same paper trail, different woman, different decade. I forwarded it to Tomas and Valora with the subject line, "Pattern confirmed." Valora responded before Tomas could. This could open a class action. She included a link to a spreadsheet already in progress. Names, dates, removed women, pushed aside beneficiaries. I wasn't the first. I wasn't the anomaly. I was just the first one to document it with teeth. And now, I had one more card to play. I dialed Lucian's direct line. He picked up faster than expected, his voice already impatient. "I hear you've been struggling to sell the Indiana house," I said, calm as still water. "Let me help. After all, my name is still on the deed." A pause. Audible inhale. "You're bluffing." "No," I replied. "I'm filing a seller's intent form first thing tomorrow. If you want to challenge it, you're free to do so, in court." He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. I didn't hang up. I let the silence stretch like an old rope, letting him feel the weight. Then I ended the call. I opened the form online and began the process, smiling for the first time in days. Not because I'd hurt him, but because I'd stopped waiting for permission to protect myself. That afternoon, a Dropbox notification appeared, from Eris Locke. The subject read, "Your mother's final word." I hesitated. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. I pressed play. It was her voice, soft but deliberate, reading from a worn journal I recognized. The green leather one she kept hidden in the back of her closet behind the vacuum cleaner. I worry they'll erase her like they erased me. But if she ever hears this, I hope she knows silence was never strength. And survival wasn't love. I let it play through twice. The second time, I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. Because for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Eris asked for my permission to include the audio in her series, Inheritance Crimes in America. I said yes. And when the episode went live that evening, I didn't refresh for comments. I didn't watch the likes or track the views. But they came anyway. This happened to my aunt. My father did this to my sister. Same thing. Different family. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't have to. I wasn't begging to be believed anymore. When you stop trying to be heard, you realize how loud the truth can be when it speaks for itself. The next morning, I walked down to my mailbox. Tucked between utility bills and pre-approved credit offers was a white envelope, official seal, no return address. Inside, a cease and desist. Lucian hadn't filed to protect the estate. He'd filed to silence the podcast episode. I smiled. Not smugly, just the smile of someone who knows they're finally playing offense. Because the problem with trying to silence truth? By the time you notice the echo, it's already gone viral. The phone hadn't stopped vibrating. Mentions, shares, a friend request from a journalist I didn't know. I placed it face down on the counter and stared at my coffee, which had gone cold hours ago. I wasn't angry. I wasn't victorious. I was done. Tomas called mid-morning. His voice was even, casual, exactly what I needed. "He's bluffing," he said. "Cease and desist means nothing if it's built on sand. He's bleeding reputation faster than assets." I thanked him, told him to keep the paperwork moving, and ended the call. I wandered through my apartment, touching things I hadn't touched in months. A postcard from Santa Fe pinned to the fridge, old receipts in a ceramic bowl. A photo of my mother from 1994 taped to the inside of the pantry door where I used to steal cookies. I whispered into the quiet, "Grief isn't only for the dead, It's for the living who disappear while breathing. I pulled a worn copy of The Invisible Thread off the shelf. My mother used to read it to me when I had nightmares, a story about bonds that held even when stretched across miles and silence. I flipped to the final page, where she'd scribbled a note. Some connections don't fray. They hide, then reappear when you need them most. Later, while answering emails for work, a message from Indira arrived. No subject line, just a single sentence. We lost Mom to this same cycle. Maybe we're both wrong. I didn't reply. I didn't rage. Because I knew what that message was. Not regret, but preemption. The kind of half-apology people offer when they sense the narrative slipping away from them. Some people apologize when they fear consequences, not because they understand their own damage. I closed the message and opened my journal. I wrote in block letters, I don't want closure, I want distance. After lunch, I opened the podcast dashboard and changed the status of the episode from public to archived. Not out of fear, but rest. The truth had already moved beyond me. It didn't need to scream anymore. A few hours later, while sorting mail, I found a small padded envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with crayon drawings, stick figures holding hands, Auntie Celine, big smile, long hair. Next to it, a note, scrawled in a child's handwriting. Mom said you don't come around 'cause they were mean. I miss your laugh. It hit harder than any subpoena ever could. I put the drawing on the fridge. That evening, I sat down with Tomas over Zoom. I updated my will, my power of attorney, transferred digital access to 2 secure contacts. Then I created a folder titled, For the Next Woman They Try This On. Inside, I placed every document, every audio file, every forged signature and email trail. On the front of the folder, in permanent ink, I wrote, What breaks doesn't always bleed, but it always echoes. Before shutting down for the night, I checked my inbox one last time. There, sitting quietly among bank notifications and spam, was a new email from Indira. No attachments, no legal CCs, just a single line. Dad's health is declining. He asked for you. Once. I didn't know what kind of goodbye he wanted, but I knew exactly which version of me would show up. The hospice room was too bright. The walls too clean. Sterile kindness always made me more uneasy than cruelty. At least cruelty was honest. Lucian lay propped up on a pillow, his face sunken but still sharp around the edges. His hair had thinned. The oxygen machine made a soft wheeze with every breath he borrowed from the world. Indira sat in the corner, silent. No spreadsheets, no clipped words, just her eyes watching me the way one watches a bridge as it burns, knowing you were the one who lit the match. I walked in without coat or folder, just the file I had carried too long. You've turned the family name into a scandal, he rasped. I placed the folder on the table next to the bed, legal confirmation of my removal from all remaining liabilities. No trace left of me, except the damage. You did that, I said calmly. I just stopped hiding the receipts. He looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. I didn't give him time. This is the last thing with my name next to yours. Indira stood. Celine. I held up a hand. This isn't about regret, I said, locking eyes with her. It's about conclusion. Lucian narrowed his gaze. You think you won? I smiled gently. No, I said. I think I survived, and winning was never the point. I left before he could respond. The next 2 weeks passed in quiet waves. Tomas filed the class action. Elena joined. So did 2 others, names I'd never heard, stories I didn't need to know to believe. Valora called late one night, her voice different this time, softer. Because you spoke, 2 other families came forward, she said. That's how change happens. I stared out the window of my new place as she spoke, a modest cabin, just outside Asheville, surrounded by tall pines, quiet fog, and the kind of light that doesn't brag about its warmth. I didn't decorate much, just enough to feel whole. Above my desk, I hung a single page, my mother's letter, framed in glass. I read it like a prayer every morning. You were always the story they couldn't control. I wrote in my journal one final entry. My silence was never surrender. It was strategy. And now it's peace. 3 weeks after the filing, a webinar was launched. National, Legal, a series on estate manipulation. My mother's voice was the opening. The same recording I once feared would break me. I watched it once, not as the daughter, but as the proof. I didn't speak in the video. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't always need a narrator. Sometimes it just needs to be unmuted. The final letter I received came from a college student in Missouri. Her grandmother had been removed from her will by a son-in-law she once trusted. Her note ended with, "Because of you, we hired a lawyer. I think my grandmother would have liked you." On a warm evening, I walked the edge of my property line, the sun dipping low through the trees. I wore no shoes, no title, just myself. They thought vanishing meant weakness, but sometimes vanishing is how you redraw a map, one they'll never walk again.